Cheers, Todd. Thank you very much. Just before we jump into it, can I get a quick show of hands of how many people here have seen our Drive to Survive Netflix series? That's pretty good, actually. Yeah, I like that. Nice. So for those who don't know, Series 2 just launched. It's an amazing behind-the-scenes series behind all of Formula One last season during 2019. So what I'm here to talk to you about today, F1 and our sustainability strategy. So, in recent years, decarbonisation and sustainability has been, an increasingly hot topic amongst current affairs. And so what we've done here is there's an expectation now for major corporations to have a defined strategy in terms of their approach to sustainability. You might have seen that most of the airline companies recently, such as EasyJet, Finnair, and AIG, have come out with what their stance is on sustainability. Microsoft recently confirmed their intention to go carbon negative. So it's become more and more on corporations to have this responsibility and what is their approach to sustainability. So before I jump into it, just got a quick video to show you now. As you can see, pretty exciting stuff. So we wanted to be bold with our sustainability plan. But people might be asking, why did we actually come out publicly and state what our sustainability strategy is? First and foremost, it's the right thing to do. As I mentioned, sustainability is becoming an increasingly hot topic amongst current affairs. And as a major corporation, we felt that we had a major responsibility to be one of the key drivers of change. Second, improved brand perception. So I guess Formula One has kind of been historically perceived as kind of the child of the internal combustion engine and probably as a non-green sport. And so what we hope from being very public with our strategy and with our goals is that we can hopefully change that perception and also kind of bust a few myths along the way. Third, attract a younger and more diverse fan base. Naturally, as a commercial rights holder, we all want to increase our fan base. And one of the key demographics for us is the Gen Z fan base. So as part of that, some studies have shown that the Gen Z fan base are more attracted to corporations that stand for a particular cause. And we know that one of those causes in particular is sustainability. Fourth, greater commercial attractiveness. Now, we all know how important sponsorship and commercial partnerships are in terms of the world of sports organizations. And now, we'll be frank and say that we've had a number of conversations with both prospects and existing partners, and sustainability has been a key topic of discussion. Now, we previously had a clear lack of story, but we hope that through our sustainability strategy, we'll be able to kind of work with our partners and having an aligned vision of where we want to take the sport. And finally, showcase the potential of the hybrid engine and sustainable fuels. Formula One is commonly perceived around the world as being one of the most innovative and technologically driven sports in the world. We hope that through our sustainability strategy, we'll be able to communicate that message in terms of what we're able to do in terms of driving the future of the automotive industry. So this is all nice, but what does this actually mean and what is actually our strategy? So this is a summary of our environmental sustainability strategy. So as you can see, we've got two key pillars. On the left-hand side, we've got countdown to zero. So our goal to be a net carbon neutral sport by 2030. And on the right-hand side, positive race print. And what we mean by that is for all of our events, not just our races, to be sustainable events by 2025. So first, focusing on the countdown to zero, what we're going to do is first we'll have a look at what Formula One's carbon footprint stands at today. So as you can see, Formula One's carbon footprint during 2019 was 257,000 tonnes. Now that's not just Formula One itself, that also includes the teams and also our major suppliers. And as you can see, the main two areas of that, the bottom left-hand side in terms of logistics and also our business travel. And what we mean by that is getting all of our equipment and all of our personnel to our races. So that's involved in terms of transporting everything that we have around the globe to 21 races annually. Now, to give you a bit of context of that, Formula One itself transports around 250 tons of equipment around the world to each race. When you include both the teams and our partners, that number increases to 800 tons. But to me, that's actually probably not the most interesting thing about this slide. And actually, it's the top left-hand corner, the power unit emissions, which actually is less than 1%. So that's the carbon footprint from the impact of our cars going around the track during the whole year is less than 1%. And that's a massive perception difficulty that we have to change for Formula One. So how are we going to address that? How are we going to get down to that zero by 2030? So our strategy is comprised of 4 key pillars: on the track, on the move, where we work, and balance to zero. Now on the track, as you previously saw, that's less than 1% of our carbon footprint, but actually it's quite fundamental for what we stand as a sport. So how are we going to go about reducing that? Well, what we want to do is have net zero carbon race cars by 2030. And how we're going to do that is 1, through our hybrid engine, and 2, through sustainable fuels. So Formula One's, not a lot of people know this, but our hybrid engine today has about a thermal efficiency of over 50%. To put that into context, you compare that to the most elite road cars of today that operate at just over 30% thermal efficiency. And in terms of sustainable fuels, so our approach is by 2030 that we want to have all of our cars powered by sustainable fuels, whether that be biofuels, second-generation biofuels, such as, for examples, as algae, or whether they be new synthetic fuels. Now, normally the question that I get at this point in time, someone puts a hand up and says, what about electric? Now, naturally it's a question, and we're completely open and we understand that electric is going to be one of the drivers toward decarbonisation in the future. But our view is that there's not just going to be one source of influence during that period. And we also think that although there's going to be some benefits to using electric power, for example, in metropolitan and major cities, actually there are most forms of transportation, such as freight, aeroplane, and lorries, that actually aren't able to use electric at this point in time. And so there are going to be alternative uses of fuels used. Just to kind of give you an example from a study, so it was shown that the estimate is 14% of newly purchased road cars by 2030 are expected to be powered by electric batteries. So that means 86% are still expected to be powered by thermal combustion engines. Second, going into on the move, and this relates back to the 45% here of our logistics. So what we actually mean by that is how can we reduce that impact of all of the equipment that we ship around the world? There's 3 main ways you can do that. 1, you ship less stuff. 2, you ship it shorter distances. And 3, you ship it more efficiently. And so what we mean by shipping it less stuff, so for example, that means that we might increase our amount of remote operations. And what we mean by that is for each of our races, we transport all of our ability to produce the international feed that is distributed globally for our television broadcast. What we tested recently in testing for this year was doing that remotely back in our base in London, and we're hopefully going to increase that level of operations throughout the season. Secondly, in terms of efficient shipping stuff lesser distances, so currently our calendar is semi-regionalized, but not completely. So for example, next weekend, our season opener in Australia. We also have our kind of middle of the season in Europe, around circa May to September, and then we end in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi. What we hope to do over time is gradually create a regionalized calendar where we'll have, for example, the Asia leg of the series, the Americas leg of the series, European, Middle East, etc. And in terms of shipping stuff more efficiently, so currently we balance a lot of our equipment between shipping it via aeroplane or via boats. Now, naturally, there's a demand for equipment during the race weekend that needs to be there immediately in the shortest amount of time. But what we try to do as much as possible is to ship our equipment via freight, which is a lot more efficient. So what we're hoping to do over time is through successful planning is to increase that ratio. Third, where we work. Now, what we mean by this is having all of our facilities, both Formula One, the teams, and our suppliers, having all our facilities being powered by 100% renewable energy. And for example, how we're going to do that, an example of this is actually with our Formula One offices ourselves, where by the end of this year, we're going to be entering into carbon purchasing agreements. And what that means is that our suppliers are going to be guaranteeing that they'll be invested in renewable energy for our buildings. And finally, balance to zero. Now, if we achieve all that I've mentioned there, the best that we can hope to achieve is a 50% reduction in our carbon footprint, which itself is a pretty good amount. But naturally, though, what that means is, one, we will have to take some level of offsetting, and two, we'll also have to do some carbon sequestration. Now, what we mean by that is literally sucking carbon out of the air. Now, the normal way that organizations go about that is through planting an increased number of trees. But another way you can do that is the development of new technologies. And Formula One, through our experience in engineering and R&D, hope that we can be one of the driving forces in terms of the development of new technologies to do so. Now going on to the right-hand side, in terms of our positive race sprint. Now, as I previously alluded to, what that means is making all of our events sustainable by 2025. So now we already have all of our races around the world. We host 21 races across 5 continents. We also host, for example, fan festivals. So this year we've got a fan festival in Johannesburg, we've got one in New York, and we're also going to have one in London. And we want all of those events to be sustainable. So first and foremost, it's what we use. And what we want to do is have all the materials that we use to be sustainable and for all waste to be reused, whether that be recycled, reused, or composted. Now, exactly how we're going to do that is collaborating with our promoters and the people that put on these events. And that starts with our first race in Australia next weekend. And so, for example, what we're going to be doing is completely removing single-use plastics from our race, and also other initiatives such as, so for example, all of the accreditation that you will receive when you attend a Formula One race will be made from recycled plastics, from your pass to your lanyard, etc. The next objective in terms of to the race. Now, what we mean by that is in terms of our individuals attending our Formula One events. Now, the number that I previously referred to in terms of the 257,000 tons, that excluded the impact from our fans attending our events. Now, if you do include our fans, that number increases to 1.9 million. Now, I know that number sounds quite big, but actually if you can benchmark that versus other events, so for example, the FIFA World Cup has a carbon footprint of 2.5 million, and also, for example, the Olympics has a carbon footprint of 4.9 million. So actually, relative to our peers, it's relatively low. And the rationale behind that is because we have a surprisingly high number of our attendees from the local countries and local communities. So how are we going to planning to reduce that? So there's 3 key ways. One, we can work with the promoters to support the use of public transport. 2, we can incentivize the use of more environmentally friendly transport, whether that be the use of bicycles, hybrid engines, or electric cars. And then finally, it's when our attendees at the point of ticket purchase, do they want to opt into the option to partially offset their journey and travel through carbon offsetting? Third, where we watch. And what we mean by this is making all circuits and facilities that are better for the well-being and nature. And so examples of this might include, so for example, Formula One, we're very fortunate that I guess we follow the sun essentially around the globe. Now, that has its natural advantages for its attendees, but also has some circumstances that we need to be aware of. And so, for example, again, I refer to some of our events this year. What we're doing is collaborating with our promoters to ensure that 1, sufficient shade is available to all attendees, 2, that hydration points are also available, And 3, that we're also making sunscreen fully available. And if you also think about, for example, what we're doing with in terms of the biodiversity, we're also collaborating with some of our races. So, for example, our event in Canada is hosted in a park in Montreal. Australia is also hosted in a park. And Barcelona has our own natural nature reserve. So what we're going to be doing is collaborating with our promoters to ensure that they are investing in terms of maintaining that biodiversity in terms of where we race. And finally, with our hosts. So when Formula One normally goes to an event, we're there for a week, kind of flying. We arrive, we're approximately there for kind of 2 to 3 weeks, and then we leave. So naturally, that has the biggest impact on the local community. So what we want to do is ensure that Formula One has a lasting legacy on the venues that we visit. So how are we going to do that? 1, working to ensure that local members of the community attend our events. Examples of this include, for example, in Australia, where our plan is for, during Thursday and Friday, for 35,000 school children to attend the event for free during Thursday and Friday. Another example of this might be where we collaborate more with local suppliers and local businesses. And so, for example, in our provision of our F&B and our merchandise, that's where we try to kind of maximize and ensure that we're kind of that collaboration with the local businesses. So that's just a summary of kind of the 2 key pillars. I guess the question is, where are we today and kind of what are the next steps? So, as you can see, our mission from our sustainability strategy is to unleash the greatest sustainable racing spectacle on the planet. Now, we announced this strategy in November 2019. It's publicly available for all people to download from our corporate website. And it's received an extremely positive response from all of our partners, whether that be the teams, our commercial partners, promoters, and sponsors. Some of you might have seen that Mercedes, following our sustainability strategy, also released their own motorsport sustainability strategy for both their Formula One and Formula E business. And so we've got the buy-in from our key stakeholders, and now it's about going about and executing. And so what we're doing is going about and ensuring that we implement the correct foundations so that we can attempt to achieve our ambitious goals by 2025 and 2030. So you might have seen in the slides that we had these foundations going across the bottom. So we're going to go about the process ensuring responsible sourcing, transparency in reporting, environmental compliance, and health and well-being. So I guess it's a very exciting time to be at Formula One. This strategy is extremely bold, and when we talk to people and talk about the targets that you will have seen, people ask, this is very ambitious, how are you going to achieve this? But we hope that by being public and transparent with our objectives, that our head's on the chopping board essentially, and we have to achieve these goals. And we're going to be working with all of our various stakeholders to make sure that we get through and reach those levels. So thank you very much for your time. Any questions? Thank you. Microphone is on the way around.
All right, thank you. You mentioned and spoke quite a bit about how you're working with your different corporate partners in Formula One to ensure that you reach the sustainability goal. Have you gotten any backlash from perhaps some of your corporate partners in the fossil fuel industry or other industries that support the use of carbon fuels?
That's a completely valid question, and I'd actually say more the opposite. We've had a number of, naturally Formula One in the nature of the industry that we operate in, we do have a number of industries that are more related to the fossil fuels, but actually are similarly aware of these problems and looking to transition more towards that kind of sustainability approach. And we hope that, I guess, people would increasingly know that the nature of commercial partnerships is changing. And so we're going to be working now with our partners to see if we can collaboratively come to a solution. I mentioned the kind of creation of new synthetic fuels. And so, for example, with our oil partners or liquid or lubricant partners, can we start to look at alternative solutions that can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels?
Hi. So just to tack onto that point, a large part of Formula One and your team's models is sponsorship. Do you envision building requirements for sponsors if they want to get in the game of sponsoring teams or Formula One to meet certain sustainability requirements as well?
So in terms of all of our relationships with our partners, so for example, we are starting to incorporate kind of requirements, and you mentioned sponsors there, particularly with our promoters. In our new agreements, we're asking all of our promoters to sign up to agreements in terms of these are the sustainability standards that we want to meet. And we're going about a process now in terms of grading our promoters in terms of where they meet in terms of our current sustainability levels and in terms of helping them to migrate further towards those standards. In terms of our commercial partners, it's something that we're very kind of actively having those conversations in terms of we set these targets, how can we work together to achieve that? And an ideal example might be someone like a Heineken, which is one of our kind of biggest and most prosperous relationships in terms of, okay, how can we work together to help to kind of change that perception of both of our brands in terms of, yes, we're fully aware of our environmental impact and what can we do to improve and change that?
Hi. I think this is a wonderful initiative. Only hypothetical downside I can think of is the lack of sound, because fans enjoy the engine sound and the steering sounds. But when it's a complete switch to electrical vehicles, for example, there is lack of. So how do you combat that? And second question is, what other downsides can you think about, and what are the mitigants that you have?
So what I will say is that our intention is not to go to electric-powered vehicles. And as I mentioned, our intention is to leverage our existing and improve our hybrid engine and then also alternative fuels. So but they will be net zero carbon fuels, so whether they're synthetic or biofuels. Now, on our view, is that will not have an impact on the sound and the atmosphere that's created kind of the whole Formula One spectacle.
Hey Miles, I actually grew up in Melbourne, so right around the Grand Prix, so I really appreciate getting to hear all about the initiatives, especially in Australia. Kind of on a similar question, how exactly do you work with the teams and try and incentivize them making hybrid or cleaner engines a really important objective, and how do they trade that off against performance if that's something they have to do?
So that's an interesting question, and I kind of take that separately in terms of from the technical side and then also in terms of from, I guess, the commercial side. And first of all, starting on the commercial side, we have a increasingly great relationship with the teams, despite what might seem publicly. And so every year we go around and we speak to the teams and we present to them in terms of the commercial initiatives that we've got planned. And our sustainability strategy has been one of the best received initiatives that we've had. And the reason for that is because we're both in the same boat. Both of us are looking to attract new commercial partners, and sustainability is constantly a question that they're getting. And so the fact that Formula One as a commercial organisation has a strategy, and then also the teams, we're working in them in terms of collaboration, in terms of what they can do as well. So that's from the commercial side. And then in terms of from the technical and the motorsport side, so our role as the rights holder, and increasingly so with our new motorsports division, we're currently in the stages of finalising our latest Concord agreement for the 2021 season, where we'll be modifying the technical regulations. And then what we'll be doing is working to then modify for our next Concord agreement in terms of how can we incorporate some of these initiatives in terms of, for example, increasing the efficiency of our engine, or in terms of the fuels that are used to power and source that engine.
Thank you. My question is, with logistics being the biggest impact on the footprint, you mentioned that the goal was to reduce the entire carbon emissions by about 50%. So how do you guys plan, and is there a goal for the logistics to get into the 20s?
In terms of percentage?
Yes.
Well, so I think those the three key initiatives that we talked about. I think one of the biggest one is in terms of how we ship the amount of freight, and two, how we ship it. So I refer to our remote operations. Currently, what we do for each of our races, we physically transport around a broadcast center to each of our races, and that produces the world feed that is then distributed to each of our broadcasters. Now, if we can actually produce that show back at base and then only have to set up the minimal infrastructure around the circuit, that for starters will have a massive impact on our footprint. Also, in terms of the amount of personnel, you might have seen, for 2020 and 2021, we're making slight modifications to the plan for the weekend in terms of the number of days and commitment. What we hope that will do is reduce the number of people that actively go to a Formula One race for each of the teams during the weekend. And in terms of how we ship our equipment, I mentioned, for example, that trade-off between both air freight and sea freight. So, for example, what we normally do is we actually have, for example, 2 sets of the exact same equipment, and what we'll do is they'll overlap one another. But what we can do is actually, if we can invest, for example, it might be more efficient or more equipment, but then what we'll actually be able to do is transport that in a more efficient way, rather than, for example, 2 fleets of aeroplanes kind of overlapping each other. It might be, for example, that we increase that, say, for example, to 4 sets of kit, but they're actually transported via freight. So again, that'll have a big impact. Any other questions?
Hi.
Hey.
So usually sustainability and sustainable causes are seen as a big cost for companies and leagues, but a few companies have notably had examples where being sustainable can actually save them money in the long run. So have you found any ways that being more sustainable and greener can actually drive profitability, or are you still looking for ways to do so, or is it just a cost?
I think that, I can't remember who said it recently, but they said that the most important thing to achieve and improve sustainability is to make it profitable for companies and be willing to invest in. I think that, we already alluded to the fact that it might be not directly profitable to invest in sustainability, but I actually think that almost the opposite, and the opportunity cost of not invested in sustainability is going to have could have a negative long-term impact on businesses. And so hence there is an incentive for companies to invest. Now, there are also technology solutions, and increasingly, there are companies popping up with more efficient solutions. An example was, a few weeks ago we met with a water supplier who's going to start providing water fountains at a number of our circuits around the calendar. Now, we've found a company that can do that extremely cost efficiently. Now, there might be slight increases versus having kind of non-reusable plastics, but actually sometimes there is going to be a cost. And if we do want to achieve these targets, and that's something that Formula One's going to have to forbear.
Thank you.
Cool. Great. Well, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.